pretty fish.
It's a well-known fact that 80 to 90% of the fish caught on any lake or river are caught by about 10% of the fishermen. And there's nothing like the feeling you get when you head out on the water for a day's fishing with the knowledge and skills that put you into that top 10%. That's exactly what this instructional series is all about, teaching you how to locate and catch largemouth bass in every seasonal situation. This 8-part program series is split into 4 seasons of the year, with 2 detailed instructional programs for each season, one on shallow water fishing and one on deep water fishing. Your host is National Tournament Fishing Pro Gary Klein, winner of several national bass fishing tournaments and a regular contender at the Bass Masters Classic, the Super Bowl of bass fishing.
He is now the view leader, Gary Klein.
Hi, I'm Gary Klein, and what I'm going to be covering is how to locate deep water fish in the wintertime. There's a lot of different ways that anglers can go about their day on the water, but probably the most important thing that everybody has a tendency to overlook, or they don't do, is put together a good, sound game plan. And this is especially very critical in the wintertime, because the wintertime is one of the hardest times of the year to catch the largemouth bass, because they're usually very dormant, inactive, and they're usually sitting in a little bit deeper water than what most anglers are used to catching them out of. So with a few helpful hints, I'm going to try to give you a better outlook on your approach to catching these deep water fish. And probably the most important thing that I do in my fishing is I always take notes. And I always try to stress to put together a good, sound game plan. When you're putting together your game plan at your office or at your home before you even head to the lake, it's always good to get your hands on just a good ordinary map of the lake, especially if you've never seen the lake before and it's your first approach. You don't need to really have a high quality topo map to show you everything that the lake has, but just a good map that will give you some good basic information. How many bridges the lake has in it, the old road beds, the main river channels and the creek channels. Then once you establish a pattern on the lake, then it's always good to get a good quality topo map, because then that'll show you the details of the areas that you have found your fish in.
During the wintertime, the bass move to deep water. The water temperature is cold, the bass's metabolism has slowed down, and the fish spend more of their time in an inactive state. Large areas of the lake have little or no bass in them. The fish tend to group up at this time of the year on vertical structures in the lake. When Gary put together his game plan for his day's fishing at the office, he chose several vertical structures to try during his day of fishing. They included bridge pilings in deep water, standing timber on the edge of the main river channel, a major creek channel, and a couple of major vertical ledges, which his topographical maps showed dropped from 20 to over 60 feet.
Well, it's sure nippy out here today, and one thing that we really want to, I guess, maybe talk about is that, gosh, it's in the middle of the winter time, and the water temperature is like in the mid-40s, probably 45, 46 degrees, and the air temperature isn't much more than that, and even in the background there's a little bit of snow up on top of the hills. But we're going to go out and do some bass fishing, and we're going to be concentrating catching bass in deep water. This is something that we've thought about, maybe all day long or all week long at the office, and we've put together a game plan. And for all the right reasons, the bass we feel are going to be in the deep water, holding against maybe the little vertical breaks. So when we're out on the lake today, we're going to try to accomplish two things. We're either going to try to establish a pattern, a water depth, and the lures to catch the fish with, or we're going to eliminate a lot of water. But most important is that we feel that the fish are in deep water, and at no time during the course of the day are we going to vary from our game plan. We've thought about it all week long, we've written it down on paper, and we're going to stay with our game plan. That's very important. Looking down the shoreline right here, you can notice how steep this bank is and how close to the bank these trees are. What this actually is the edge of the old river channel that runs down through the lake. And this timber sits right on the old river banks. This is real good vertical fishing. It's real good structure in the middle of the winter time. Fish like to use the shallow water, which is real close to the deep water. And the trees are really a key factor on these type of banks. You can notice how the trees are sitting out off of these little points. Well, the bass will usually relate to the base of the trees or right in the heart of the trees for their cover and their access to the real deep water. It's real important that each day, or I guess really each hour while you're fishing, that you observe the positioning of the fish. If they're very aggressive and active, they'll move up into the tree and they'll usually hit the bait before it even reaches the bottom. But the greatest majority of the time, the fish will come from the very base of the tree on the bottom. In the wintertime, one thing that I'd like to say is that there's two primary sources of food for your bass. One is a crayfish and the other is bait fish. Usually what happens at this time of year is your crawdads will hibernate and the fish can't get to those to the crawdads. So the bait fish becomes a primary source of food for the bass. And what happens, especially on your man-made reservoirs, there's no thermocline to restrict your bait fish or your bigger fish. What will happen is the bait fish will move or migrate into your deeper water depths, because that's where your plankton is at. It's now sitting on the bottom. There's not much of an algae blossom or anything taking place on the surface, and your bass will in turn follow the bait fish down to those depths.
It's important for the angler to remember that water depth is relative to the lake or river you are fishing. If you're fishing in a lake with depths of over 100 feet, then 50 or 60 feet is deep water. But if you're fishing in a pond with 10 feet as the deepest water, then 9 feet is deep water. The important point to remember is that the bass is looking for any type of vertical structure which may be present. In a 10-foot deep pond with a dock and pilings in it, the pilings may represent the best vertical structure in deep water which the pond has to offer. It's critical for the angler to look at each pond, lake, or river individually to determine the best potential vertical structure and deep water areas which are available on that body of water.
One thing about wintertime fishing that really makes it very exciting is that at any time you're liable to find the fish grouped up. That's pretty common in your real cold water temperature conditions, that you'll find the fish bunched. And normally when you do, you can keep the boat in one spot and catch just fish cast after cast. And it may be a real small little area where all these fish are grouped at. on a little vertical break or maybe at the base of a tree. So this time of year, always be aware of that you can catch more than one. So don't be afraid to get a cast right back in behind the fish that you just caught as quick as possible. Wintertime fishing is awful neat too. It's nice and peaceful and quiet. You don't have a lot of water skiers running around. And in fact, some of my best days of fishing have been out here when it's real nice and comfortable, no wind blowing, and it's like everybody's sitting home watching TV. And now's the time to be out on the lake fishing. I don't even think he knows he's hooked yet. Nice fish. When you're fishing in the wintertime in this real clear water, because the temperatures are so cold, I really prefer to fish with lighter line. A lot of it has to do with fishing with the little tiny baits, real light baits, and also the real cold weather keeps your line from tangling up. Lighter line, your 6 and 8 and 10 pound test lines is a lot easier to control. Your lures with you. Nice little spotted bass. Nice fat little, nice spotted bass. Boy, they're sure thick. They got real nice shoulders on them. Spots are a real common fish to catch in the real cold water temperatures. And usually when you catch one, there's more there. The technique that I'm using is a very good light line technique. And all I'm using is 6 pound test line on a little ultralight spinning outfit. And this is one of my favorite ways to fish in the wintertime under these conditions. And I'm using a 3/16 ounce slip sinker and just a little straight 4-inch worm. And as the worm is falling vertically, as I'm allowing it to fall, I let line off the reel and I let the bait fall, I'm sort of shaking it, jiggling it with my rod tip. And once the lure hits the bottom, then I just kind of raise the rod tip up, which raises the bait just a few inches off the bottom, and shake it. And usually the strike will just be a sponge type feeling, or the fish will just tug on it real hard. Basically what I try to tell people when you're fishing any lures is there's no way to explain the strike. All it is just something different. And anytime you're fishing and you feel something different, then swing. Because more than likely that's usually the fish.
Many changes have taken place in the bass's environment during the wintertime on major reservoirs. The fall turnover of the thermocline usually has occurred because the water on the surface of the reservoir is cooling off. The cooler water is heavier than the warmer water below, causing it to fall and mix. Now the oxygen has been evenly distributed and there are no restrictions on the bass, and no restrictions on the depths that he can and will migrate to.
Sort of as a rule of thumb when you're fishing in the wintertime, especially in the real deep water, is I always try to find the clearest water available. For some reason, when the water temperatures get real cold, the fish that are in dirty water just won't hit. They become very dormant, very inactive. Whereas the clear water fish, you always have the tendency that you can at least get a few strikes. I like fishing a lot of the main lake stuff. I think probably what we're saying is more of the major structures, your main river channels, your large creek breaks, instead of the little subtleties. Try to concentrate on more of your major pieces of structure. And the reason for this is, again, we talked about the fish being grouped up. When you locate fish in these particular areas, you're going to locate more than one fish. You're going to find a good concentration of fish, and they're not going to move from that area. The wintertime, they usually will stay at that depth and they'll stay on that piece of structure. It's going to be kind of like their winter home for a while, especially on your man-made reservoirs. Remember to really pay attention to your depth finders too. They'll really tell you an awful lot about the environment that your boat is over. Right now I'm sitting in about 30, 35 feet of water, and I can see a little bit of fish activity up in 15. That doesn't really mean that I'm going to change my train of thought of what I'm trying to do here, but it just makes me aware of the environment, everything that's going on. If some activity starts and some fish move up off of the bottom, then I can see them on my depth finder. And a lot of times this will result in a bait change. The lure that you're throwing may not be the correct lure to throw. So by paying attention to your front depth finder while you're fishing, keeping your eyes on it as much as possible, and being aware of the activity that's taking place at a certain depth will give you some new ideas. You may want to try to throw a jig and spoon or maybe a jig or a large crankbait at that depth to catch the fish. And if you fish with an open mind like that, you're going to increase your success instead of being hard-headed and staying with the same lures. There's nothing sacred about the lures that you're fishing with. Always remember that they're just a tool to help you catch fish. It doesn't matter what you have to throw to do it. As long as the tool helps you get the job done, then it's a good fishing lure. Boy, he is hot. Now, that fish had moved right up off this break, right up on top of this point. That fish is sitting up in about 20 feet of water. This water here is real clear. Another big old spot. The thing that scares me most about catching these nice fish in this light line is that they get that line over their teeth. And that's usually what will cause your line to break. But if you fight them real easy and just take your time with them, kind of lead them around with the fishing rod, and don't get excited, you usually boat all the fish that you get. Another nice big old spotted bass. And look at the belly on that fish, just real nice and fat, real healthy, fun fish to catch. We ought to be able to get another fish here. I can see him on the depth finder. And we just had a couple of hits, just right down this one little stretch right here. I caught one and lost two and had one get me in the tree and break me off that 6-pound test line, but they're nice looking fish. It looked like they were 3 or 4 pounders. Just might get another hit here. There's a fish there that's just a couple feet off the bottom. In fact, there's a lot of activity up and down this bank. And when I say activity, I mean that there's a lot of bait fish and fish that are up off of the bottom. And that usually means that they're active. They're up moving around and kind of swimming up and down this bank. So anytime you see a lot of bait fish and a lot of other type of fish on your depth finder, it means you're in a pretty fertile area. There's a lot of fish activity up and down these banks. And that's the type of stuff you're looking for. You want to always try to stay in productive water. And this spot here, or this stretch of bank, we just didn't really happen to stumble onto this bank. This is a bank that we had chosen before we'd even arrived at the lake. By looking at a topo map, studying the weather conditions, the time of year, water clarities, and what type of fish we wanted to catch. And we knew we wanted to fish for deep water. We wanted to fish main structures, such as river channels, such as this right here, with a few type of vertical structures. And the trees happen to be the vertical structures sitting right on the edge of the real deep water. So we actually found this spot on a map before we even arrived. And once we got here, then we can kind of see what it looked like. And it's worked out really good for us. We've been on the lake for less than 2 hours, and we've already are starting to develop what we call a pattern. The fish happen to be, or the activity that we've had, the fish have been on these little points, these little secondary points right on the edge of this river channel. It seems like every little point that we go to, we get a bite. And so far we've seen spotted bass and largemouth bass. We haven't caught a smallmouth yet, but we're liable to just about any cast. Well, that fish was down there about 40 feet. Nice one. Boy, they get up and they see the another nice big old fat spotted bass. They just don't want to come up to the top. They want to stay down there in that deep water. Oh yeah. Saves me from having to get my hands in that cold water. There might be another fish sitting right there with that one. That fish was sitting right on the edge of the creek channel. I mean, just right on the edge, probably about 40, 45 feet. Now, it's real important that once you catch a fish, to get a cast right back in where that fish was caught at, because a lot of times there's a lot, like we've been talking about, there's a lot more than one fish in these little areas. And you could find a spot that you could just sit here and just have a real good time catching fish. You never have to move for the rest of the day. Another real good lure to use under these type of conditions, especially when you observe fish up off the bottom on your depth finder, is a spoon, such as this spoon that I am tying on here. It's a 3/4 ounce spoon, and it's one of my favorite sizes, but you can cover the water with it so efficiently to locate groups of fish. It's really an excellent bait. It's a real good technique to use at this time of the year. Vertical jigging. And you can fish the bait that's like right down through the centers of trees, and it just actually resembles a little dead shad fluttering down. It's a real easy lure to fish. Just drop it, let it go to the bottom, and lift it up, and just kind of hop it just a little ways. And the fish usually will pop it pretty hard. But this is probably the key time of the year in the wintertime that spoon fishing kind of comes into its own. Just kind of hop it just a little bit and kick the spoon off to the side and let it fall back down. Just kind of make it look like a little wounded minnow. And the fish will usually just stop it or hit it real hard and sharp. It's a fascinating way to fish at this time of the year. See if I can't get him to swim. Oh, yeah, he's still on there. He's got around one limb. Nice fish. See how he swatted at that lure and missed it? Got him right in the back of the head. That's a real nice little fish though, and he was sitting right, let's see, it's about 50 feet deep right here, and he was sitting right on the edge of this underwater tree. And he hit that spoon on the flutter on the way down. So a lot of times you'll get him hung up in the trees like that, and don't get excited and pull too hard, because usually he has his mouth open and he's just pinned up against a branch. Back off on him a little bit and let him swim away, then just kind of ease back up on him. And you'll usually boat the fish. But don't get excited and break your line by pulling too hard. Try to work the fish out of the tree.
There are several reasons why the majority of the bass have moved into deeper water. One reason is that the bass's deep water environment is more stable during this time of year. Winter storm fronts don't affect these deep water bass as much as fish in shallow water. Secondly, the entire food chain has moved deeper. At this time of the year, the crawfish are hibernating. Plankton, which is the food for smaller fish, is now in deeper water, And the bait fish follow the plankton, and in turn the bass follow the bait fish, which is their main food source at this time of the year.
Whenever I'm fishing in deep water, as a rule of thumb, I always try to keep my cast directly underneath the boat for several reasons. One of the reasons is that my bow-mounted depth finder, which are your eyes when you're fishing in that real deep water, the transducer is directly below you, so everything that you're watching on your depth finder is taking place directly below you. But another big reason is for the control that you have of your bait. The best control that you're going to have is a direct line from your rod tip to your lure. And that is on a vertical, when you're straight vertically fishing, you have a better control. If I was to make a cast, I think what I'm trying to say is if I was to make a cast and that lure is sinking, I'm not going to have direct contact from the rod tip to the lure because the water is going to hold my line up and I'm going to have a bow. That's going to take away my sense of feel, and that's going to also distract from a good positive hook set. Whereas when I'm fishing vertically, from the rod tip to the bait, it's directly straight below me, so I have a real good feel. If I move my rod tip up an inch, that lure has just moved an inch. And not only that, but when I receive the bite in this real deep water, I have better control of the fish when I'm bringing them up from the bottom, especially if I'm fishing around timber or if I have a lot of cover that I'm fishing, and I can pull the fish directly up off of the bottom. So there's a lot of reasons to fish vertically as much as possible. Now sometimes you can't, but whenever the conditions present itself and you can get away with it, try to keep your rod, your bait, your trolling motor, your depth finder, well, your trolling motor is where your transducer is at, all together and combine it in a nice little area so that you can watch the fish in the deeper depths, watch your lure, sometimes you can see it on the depth finder, and keep everything in your control. And once you hook the fish, you can bring him up off the bottom in that deep water and fight him around the boat, and just take your time with him and you'll land those fish. Really, your deep water fishing is no different than your shallow water fishing. The only difference is when you're fishing shallow, you have visible targets. And in deep water, you have those same targets, but they're covered up by water. That's why your chart recorder and your flasher units are very important, because those are your deep water eyes. But remember, you're fishing the same creek channels and the same river channels. It's just one's deep and one's shallow. So when you're out there in that 30 and 40 foot of water, pay attention to a chart recorder and to a flasher.
This is the time of the year when chart recorders, flashers, and marker buoys are some of the most important tools the angler has at his disposal. Using his flasher or chart recorder as his underwater eyes, the angler looks for the steeper vertical drop-offs in the deep water. Outside river bends or the outside bends of creek channels are good examples of these types of drop-offs. Then, by setting his marker buoys at the edge of these drop-offs, the angler can use the buoys as reference points to help pinpoint his casts into the most productive water in that area.
Always remember that if you're not doing very good fishing in real shallow water, don't be afraid to move out off the banks. As you can see, we're sitting out here in 50 feet of water out off the edge of these points. And a little bit earlier, we were fishing up shallow. We weren't doing any good. Matter of fact, I fished this same spot about 2 hours ago and never had a strike. But I came back to it and fished it out deeper in your 50 and 60 foot range. And we've just taken like several fish, spotted, largemouth, and a little smallmouth off of this spot. And the fish were all sitting in 50 feet of water. So don't be afraid to move out. If you're not catching anything up shallow, move out and get out off of what we call breaks. Your vertical type structure, this is where the fish migrate to in the wintertime. This is their home. They stay deep, 30, 40, 50 feet of water. Remember, once you've located that piece of structure, the vertical piece of structure, try to get the boat directly over the top of that structure and pinpoint your cast with a vertical cast. It's very important that you fish slow and easy and very precise. Boy, that's sure reading good. That jig's just now coming off the break. About 45, went off into 50. 55. I can see a little bit of fish activity, just a couple feet off the bottom. 55, off the break. Fish ought to be right in here. There's one. That's where they've been at all day long with this sun out. These fish have been holding right on the steepest part of the structure. And you have to fish real slow and easy to get the strike. If you fish your baits, hop them real hard or bounce them too hard, the fish won't hit it. But if you just drag it along, the fish will come along and pick it up. And a lot of these fish are spotted bass. We've been catching a couple largemouth and every now and then a little smallmouth, but the greatest percentage of the fish are all spotted bass. Deep water fishing is some of the toughest fishing I've ever done in my life, and especially in the wintertime. Air temperatures are cold, water temperature is real cold, and the fish are usually in a dormant state. They're very sluggish. In the wintertime in a lot of our lakes, the fish will migrate into your deeper depths. And when they do this, they're usually going into the deeper depths to winter. They get into their sanctuaries and they're very hard to catch. I think what I'm really trying to say most of all is that don't give up when you're out in the deep water. Some days you may only get 1 or 2 strikes, and other days you may have an excellent day and catch a large number of fish. But by all means, don't be afraid to get off of the shorelines. Move out into the deep water. That's where the fish move at in the wintertime. And you could find a spot that you could just sit here and just have a real good time catching fish. You never have to move for the rest of the day. The thing that scares me most about catching these nice fish in this light line is that they get that line over their teeth. The hottest fish of the day, he went absolutely bananas. I sort of try to stay with my lures underneath the boat. Well, when you're out here in deep water, to keep your enthusiasm up and to kind of give you those targets to throw to again, you have to see them on your depth finder, because you're still fishing the same stuff, the trees, the rocks, and the bushes. It's just that they're in the deeper zone. Major creeks are something that you don't want to pass up. But remember, if you're going to spend time taking a look at creeks, always go to your larger creeks, the ones that have the defined channels, creek channels that run down the center of them. Nice fat largemouth. He hit that jig 3 times before I finally got him. And the spotted bass are a fun fish to catch. They're usually in your deeper water, but it sure makes for a real nice day. Can you imagine going out on a lake and catching 3 different types of fish in one day? That's fantastic.